Hello, I'm Garth Ennis.
I'm Rob Williams.
I'm Keith Burns.
I'm Torunn Grønbekk.
I'm Chris Burnham.
And I'm Brian Vaughan. Welcome to Forbidden Planet TV.
Welcome to Forbidden Planet TV. I'm Andrew Sumner, here at Forbidden Planet Television with the dirty half dozen of global comic creators put together by the man, the myth, the legend, Garth Ennis. How are you, Garth?
All right, mate. Pretty good.
Good to see you too, mate. And here also is Rob Williams, Keith Burns, Torunn Grønbekk, Chris Burnham, and Brian Vaughan. Welcome. Good to see you all. So, guys, can you explain, Garth, why this particular half dozen came to be? And we all know what you're working on, which is the third volume, the 10-issue maxi series of Battle Action. But how did this group of people come to be? Who are only some of the people involved in the project?
Well, myself and Keith were involved from the beginning, from the very first volume of Battle Action that we did 2 years ago. We obviously do Johnny Red together. With the success of that first volume, 2023 saw the 5-issue miniseries. Some of these guys were involved, of course. Chris was on Crazy Keller in both those issues. Rob came on board to write Major Eazy and Death Squad. Torunn came in to take over Nina Petrova and the Angels of Death. For the third series, we thought we ought to have something special, something a little extra, and that is why we got Mr. Brian K. Vaughan in to write Kids Rule OK, which I regard as a personal coup, as a matter of fact. And I should say, of course, that the people you see here are just a fraction of the overall creative team. There are many more. Dan Abnett's back, John Wagner's back on HMS Nightshade. You have Tom Foster drawing Death Game. You have Steve White writing, and John McCrae drawing Hookjaw. I mean, we've got a lot of people on this third series, 10 issues and 10 different strips overall.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing stuff. And no finer place for Uncle Steve White to be than drawing Hookjaw. That is for sure. So Brian, what's your personal history with this whole milieu, the Kids Rule OK British comics? What was your introduction?
I know so little about all of this. I'm really scared that I'm going to be quizzed on this and you're going to find out how dumb I am. I love, I grew up reading Alan Moore comics. He's a big hero of mine. I love Garth's work. And I suppose from there, those gentlemen have introduced me to this other work and the work that inspired them. So I'm coming at this as a bit of an outsider, but with great affection for the work now that I've discovered it, and just seeing how much better it was than a lot of the American comics I was raised on, with apologies to all of the Yankee viewers out there. But yeah, you guys have got us beat, I think, on every front.
Well, that's very gracious of you, mate. I'm not sure I agree, but it is lovely to hear. And with regard to Kids Rule OK, this last appeared in volume 1, right, Carl?
That's right. Yeah, that was a rather peculiar strip, actually, because Kevin O'Neill drew that one. Like Chris, actually, he was a surprise to me because both Chris on Crazy Keller and Kevin on Kids Rule OK were suggestions by editor Oliver Pickles. And I honestly couldn't believe my luck in either case. Chris's work was less known to me at that time, but what a natural fit for Keller. Kevin's work, of course, I mean, the man's a legend, or was a legend to me growing up. And the thought that he could come on board and do Kids Rule OK, which both continued an instance from the original strip, a particular and very peculiar cover, but also had a kind of commentary on what happened to the original Kids Rule OK and what it is reputed to have done to Action, i.e. pretty much got the comic cancelled. Well, that was a real treat and a real surprise. But that strip, the one in the first issue, it's not really it's not really a proper continuation of the original Kids Rule OK. It is, as I say, commentary. It's what Brian and Chris did in this series, in this first issue of the third volume, that is more of a continuation of that original 1976 strip.
Yeah, guys, do you want to talk about where your jumping off point actually was for this for your version of Kids Rule OK, which has a glorious title, by the way, which is The Septic.
Sure. Yeah, the septic. Septic is a term I first heard out of Garth's mouth, and I thought, oh, that's so perfect. And what an excellent way to describe Americans. So, yeah, he invited me to play in this world, and I just knew I didn't want to do a war comic. That A, was going to require a lot of homework I didn't want to do, and that no matter how much homework I did, Garth would still point out that I got some tank treads wrong, or, you know, some guy's helmet is off. So I was like, I don't want to play in this war world. Yeah, so I was familiar with Kids Rule first from Garth's story, and I liked it so much I went back and read all of the previous installments. And I thought, this is excellent, and I love this world, and it felt like there was a way that I could play in there without sort of being beholden to any of the existing characters, and just do a sort of fun little one-off. And yeah, tell it from an American point of view. And yeah, that's how it began. So just hearing that I get to work with Chris, who's someone I've never had a chance to work with before, I was like, oh, his art is so incredible, and just expressive, hilarious characters. And he just does violence so well that I thought, yeah, just 14 pages, we had an opportunity to do something very mean-spirited, and that would make people angry. And that's always exciting.
I think gloriously mean-spirited is the way I'd describe it. And Chris, I really loved what you did with Crazy Keller in the first volumes. I think you're such a great choice for that. And for reasons that become obvious, as Brian has alluded to, as the strip goes on, for Kids Rule OK, you're just such a glorious fit for that, mate.
Well, thanks very much. I appreciate it. Yes, please don't compare me to Kevin O'Neill ever again, but otherwise, everything else very nice.
And Chris, for you, how familiar were you with the British war comics? Is it something you knew before you got into
I've been pretty into it for the last 15, 20 years. I started picking up all the 80s like quality reprints. So at one point, I basically read all the classic 2000 AD stuff, except for Bad Company. I think is basically the only like classic 80s strip that I've never read. But the earlier stuff from the 70s is basically impossible for you know, for me to get my hands on. So I never read Kids Rule OK until Oliver sent me a PDF of it. I've been hearing about it for years. It's like I'm going to go to jail or whatever for reading this thing, and it really is great. But I'd never gotten a chance to read it until 3 months ago or whatever.
And how long did it take you to put it together, mate? How long were you working on the art for?
I don't know, a month or so. I don't know, something like that. I mean, it was in the works for quite a while, but I had to finish. I had to get a couple other things off my plate, so I was, you know, chewing on it in the back of my head while I was drawing Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or something, waiting, anxiously awaiting drawing this thing. Super, one of the best scripts I've ever had. And Brian says he hasn't read this British stuff, but he's got. I mean, he's very KO. Look at him. He's got the hate deep within him. So just reading the script, it's like, oh, this dude absolutely gets that, like, really mean John Wagner, Pat Mills, just like, you know, bile coming out of it. It's really funny, really snappy. Like, I knew exactly how to draw every panel. It's just like right down the middle. It's great.
I love it, mate. That's great. And what was your experience if you flip back to Crazy Keller? How did you find working with Garth on that?
Oh, it's great. It was. I mean, there's lots fewer tanks to draw in this one, which I appreciate. But yeah, Crazy Keller was great, and I very challenging script, I would say. He was pulling no punches, and there's a couple solutions I had to come up with in those stories that I still am you know, really patting myself on the back for figuring out how to get all that information and gesture and stuff across in a way that I think works pretty well. The one when he's secretly passing the note, Garth, took me forever to figure that panel out, but once I fucking nailed it, man. Good work.
Yeah, you did. You absolutely did. I mean, you have one story which is literally non-stop because it's just a jeep racing across enemy territory,
Right.
the gunner killing everything in sight. And then the second one is, it starts off fast moving, but then a lot of it gets quite sedentary. It's just two sides facing each other. So yeah, you had a lot of problems to solve in both, but you solved them in admirable style.
Well, I appreciate it. Thanks very much.
Who would expect anything less, mate? Who would? And Torunn, you're back in this third volume, working again on a fantastic character, Nina Petrova. Where does your Nina story find our heroine?
Well, we are evacuating. So she, like, the entire base is evacuating, and she's heading back to get her navigator. And it is it was a curious thing back then, because you were sort of like, if you you could very easily be labeled a deserter. So it's one of those, like, would you rather go to the front, or would you rather go to be arrested? So I'm sort of playing around with that for a bit, and then we get into some crazy action in the end there, because we just have to see how much we can push. Like, we tried to kill Paddy. That's what we're trying to do. Just see if we can kill him this time.
I get that completely. Now, you have an overwhelming interest in and knowledge of, World War II combat, military combat. Where does that all come from? Is that something that's been with you your whole life?
Well, in usual company, I have an overwhelming knowledge, but not in this company, I realized. We went to Duxford last week, or whatever it was, and I don't know what Garth is on. I don't know what his brain is made of, but it's something icky. But I did still, he explained the sort of Mark 16, the Spitfire Mark 16 to me, and then I repeated it in front of a bunch of Spitfire dudes the other day, and they were so impressed. It was great. But I don't know. It's one of those, I started making models when I was a kid, and it's I love military history, and at some point they just sort of merged.
Yeah. I mean, I know you've been very self-effacing, because I've witnessed your knowledge firsthand, and it is quite the thing to behold.
I'm just saying, you usually very impressive.
Well,
not last Sunday.
Speaking of that, you've mentioned a couple of touchstones, which for me means one thing. This is the time to start speaking to Keith Burns, because it's high levels of detail, model making. How are you, by the way, mate? It's great to see you again.
Good. This might seem like a real treat, having a lot of people in the same room, but this is kind of my normal life, where Garth watches me through a camera all day, every day, making sure I get everything historically accurate.
It's just there, isn't it? Just on that shelf.
Just on the corner there, yeah.
So that's some of your great models in the background, though, mate. Right?
Oh God, yeah. There's all sorts here. I won't bore you with them all, but yeah, there's a whole there's shelves full of this stuff. You can't really see them.
How can you just talk about how the models are involved in what you do? I found this really interesting.
Yeah, so I tend to make them. Obviously, I get Garth's script and I have to go and make a list of all the models I have to build. But because we've been doing it, when was Johnny Red? It was 2016 or something. So
sounds about right. Yeah,
build the models for all that time. When I need to, and then working on Ladybird books and bits and bobs. But I find it really easy to build a model, and then as you're building it, you're flipping it around in your hand and you're absorbing, how it looks from every angle, and how the engine's built in the cockpit. So when it comes to drawing it, then you've kind of absorbed it all without really realizing. So I find that the easiest way of doing it. I've tried using digital programs, but they don't really have the same effect. And then once you build a model up, if you want to get really nerdy, I'll give you one here. So here's one for the Johnny Red I'm on now. That's all marked up and weathered. But the beauty of that is, if I take that outside in the sunlight and photograph it, then I have all the information I need. So depending on which way you turn it, you're just getting highlights and reflected light and dark shadows. So I've got shelves full of the things, which makes me look like an absolute mentor, but gets the job done. But I still hope to get to a point where I don't need to build any anymore, because I enjoy it. But when it turns into work, it's a different thing. So most times when I'm asked to do something, I have a model on a shelf somewhere, unless of course working for Garth and he asks for some random thing that no one's ever heard of, apart from the fellow who designed it in 1940, and then you have to find a model and make something up. So that's my goal, is to get to the point where I don't have to build a model again.
I think I think that process of yours, and I think the results it's yielded are it is a fascinating process. And of course, you've been truly embraced by the wild world of aviation art fans, and you've had your work shown at the RAF Club, right? And you did the whole curated thing there. I mean, what an amazing thing if you're an aviation artist to be like literally embraced by the British military aviation establishment like that.
Yeah, it's a bit odd.
Did you enjoy it though, mate?
I did. Well, I just enjoy drawing and painting stuff. And you end up going to strange places and getting asked to do, interesting things, which is great. But I've just had to mow the lawn and make the dinner for the kids, so it's just like my normal life.
So in this volume 3, in this 10-part maxi series, the essential format is it's Johnny Red in every issue, one long overarching story, and then a different strip each time, whether it's Kids Rule OK, whether it's Nina. But what can you tell me about the Johnny Red story that you guys are creating, which I believe is the final Johnny Red story?
Yeah. It's called A Couple of Heroes. It's essentially the story of how Johnny, towards the end of the war, all his friends dead, his lover gone missing, burnt out, not much left to fight for, wondering why he keeps going, is given one final opportunity to do one last insanely dangerous job. In return, essentially, for the location of said missing lover, the location of Nina Petrova, who he hasn't seen in well over a year, who used to be his, well, not just lover, but comrade in arms. She's the last remnant, really, of the old Johnny Red strip. She means everything to our hero. She was his reason for existing once, she could be again, and so Johnny takes on this one last job. It involves a series of adventures in which I've managed to get in, I think, all the very best elements of the old strip, which is dogfights, action on the ground, intrigue with the Soviet secret police. Let's see, Johnny and Nina themselves, their relationship, the flying gun, Eric von Jürgen, and I suppose a Hurricane fighter being delivered to combat by means of a cam ship, which I've always thought was one of the most insane inventions in all of warfare, to put a tiny single-seat fighter on the nose of a merchant ship and rocket it off with no hope of return. These were all the elements that made up the classic Johnny Red strip, and I hope I've managed to get it all in there for this last one.
Brilliant, mate. And how many different craft have you had to draw for this one, Keith?
I think I've made about 12 extra models.
Wow.
Some of them just appear in one panel here and there. Two at the back, two that I built, spent a week on each, and they both appeared in the same panel once.
I should say in something approaching my own defense that I do say at the start, is there anything you want to draw? And he tells me, and I write it in. So it does kind of work out,
No, it does.
Yeah.
Mate,
do they have Google Images in the UK? Have they invented that already?
Yeah. No, I never heard of it.
Chris, did you build models for our story? I hope our headset American kid, did you have a 3-dimensional build of him?
No, for Crazy Color, I bought a Jeep. That's about it. For ours, I spent a lot of time looking at references stuff, but I didn't build anything.
Disappointing.
I should have built
I'll build it.
Westminster Academy or whatever. I should have built the whole thing.
Oh yeah, exactly.
The thing I would say, gents, to both Chris and to Keith, is in both instances, being a man of a certain age who's familiar with this stuff from way back from my heaving comic book collection. I thought with both of you, you really delivered that kind of X factor with both of your lead characters. So at the end of the first issue, the Hurricane, Keith, when you first see your version of Johnny Red, I was like, man, that is Johnny Red. And your version of Crazy Keller, Chris, is just note perfect. It's great stuff. You really got those characters really right from the get-go when you see them in the first panels they appear. It's just lovely stuff.
Well, thanks.
Well, thanks very much. That's awesome to hear.
Well, I know you should be professional comic book artist.
Semi-professional.
And moving along. Right, sorry to leave you till last here, Rob, but I know you're working on some really interesting stuff in this third series. What can you tell us about it, mate?
This time around, I'm writing El Mestizo, who is the most dangerous man in the American Civil War, which, considering how many people died in the American Civil War, is saying something, I think. And I'm doing Major Eazy again. So El Mestizo this time is with Henry Flint, excuse me, and Major Eazy is with PJ Holden. And both times they're sort of characters who were drawn by the great Carlos Esquerras. So, you know, big shoes to fill, but they've done amazing jobs. And yeah, I've worked with both of them a bunch, but yeah, it's a bit of a treat, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think I saw some of the work that PJ's doing, and that's a really unusual character for you guys. Where did you? Was that you, Garth? Did you pluck the characters for this series, or did you let the guys go and say, "I want to do this"?
No, a lot of this comes from consultation with Oliver Pickles, the editor, or Oliver comes up with the ideas himself. I mean, I'm not a big fan of Major Eazy. I actually prefer Crazy Keller because I think it's a better go at the same archetype. But Major Eazy was always a very, very popular battle action strip, and therefore it would be insane not to have him in there. So the obvious choice seems to be to hand the character over to talented people who are going to do a great job. Rob and Henry, and now Rob and PJ.
Yeah, Henry did a Major Eazy last time around with me, and Henry's just an absolutely extraordinary talent, I think. But whatever he turns his hand to, and I think the reference actually drove him mad. So he decided to, you know, he'll go to the American Civil War where there was no reference needed whatsoever, of course. But again, he's just done an absolutely sort of stunning job on it, and El Mestizo sort of lends its. I enjoy a good Western, so it's kind of fun to kind of drop that in the middle of all the sort of, you know, battle action is largely World War II, right? So for the most part, so it's nice to sort of a different kind of milieu for the entire thing.
Robert, when you were doing El Mestizo, is any creator or filmmaker of comics or film or TV that you're particularly channeling that was useful to you?
Not really. I mean, it's kind of, you know, you go back to things like Once Upon a Time in the West is in your head and that type of thing, but it's just he's such an insane, very comic-y, talks about him. I think I like it because he talks about himself in the third person continually throughout the strip. There's something very comics about that, which is kind of fun. And the fact that he works for, you know, he takes the money from both sides in the Civil War, but works only for himself. But then there's a kind of twist at the end. But I think whether it's Major Eazy or El Mestizo, you kind of, you know, history stuff is basically, the history books are your sort of ally with sort of coming up with stories, because you just read any sort of historical text from these periods and there's a million set pieces where you go, well, that'd be a great story, that'd be a great story. So this time around El Mestizo, there was the great sort of train robbery, which I sort of basically just lifted and just stuck El Mestizo in the middle of it. The whole sort of like Chattanooga choo-choo, forgive my pronunciation. So yeah, suddenly we've got like two trains racing against each other and potentially bashing into one another without giving any spoilers away. Which is, you know, when you've got like 12 pages or 14 pages, you haven't got a lot of time to mess around. So it's just good action strip, lots of insane fun, and as I think Torunn said earlier, try and kill the artist. That's the policy.
No final words, mate. Is it like liberating jumping into, say, a 12-page length when you're doing what are essentially this, for all of you doing this series of backup strips? I imagine, you know, it's a nice confined piece of narrative you can get in and out and tell the story quickly with the beginning, a middle, and end. Is there a pleasure in doing that rather than working on a big overarching piece?
Yeah, absolutely. It's just like you said, it's just there's no room to mess about really. You've just got to hit some action. It's called battle action, for God's sake. You can't have them sit around talking philosophy. Well, maybe you could. Yeah, there's not, there's an inherent structure to it, and you don't have time to get bored. And I think if you read the old classic strips as well, one of the kind of the DNA of it is there's an amazing cliffhanger on every page, basically. So you try and stay true to that. Maybe tonally we're trying to move battle action a tiny bit into sort of 2024, but at the end of the day, we're still staying true to the things that made that comic such a great read in the first place.
Yeah, one of the things I was talking to Garth about, I think the last time you were on, mate, is the beauty of being able to play around with battle action in the way that you have. Is all of these characters were like in abeyance for 30 years, and the beauty of it is they're kind of preserved in aspic almost. So they finish publication, nobody gets in and messes around with them and does anything else with it until you guys have jumped on board collectively and are now playing around with those characters, but in a way that really channels what was great about them in the first place.
Yeah, I think so. Battle went through various incarnations and ceased publication, I think, in about 87. There've been until Keith and I did Johnny Red in 2016, there'd been no more Johnny Red strips, and the others had lain fallow that entire time, apart from reprint. So we're able to go back, take all these great characters and strips, and simply bring them up to date for a modern audience, while at the same time staying true to what they are. I think the opportunity to work on a character like Nina Petrova, even above and beyond Johnny Red himself, is absolutely terrific. It's a wonderful opportunity for myself and for Keith and for Torunn, because what you have is a female character created in British comics before Judge Anderson and Judge Hershey, before Purity Brown, Venus Blue Jeans, and Durham Red, who is actually the equal of the male lead of the strip. There's nothing he can do that she can't. If he rescues her, she'll be rescuing him 5 minutes later. There's something kind of remarkable about that a guy like Tom Tully, a writer like Tom Tully, known for football and other sports strips and a few war strips in the late 70s, purely because he's working his way through the history of the Russian front, which is really the brief of Johnny Red, to explore warfare on the Russian front in a way that no British comic had before, is able to create a character like that and quite matter-of-factly slot her into the strip in a way that, Torunn, you can give us your judgment on this, but I would say that manages to do it without condescension.
Oh yeah, and it is so subtle too. I think it's I remember seeing that for the first time, and I think the first page I ever saw, Nina carries a box, and she's sort of allowed to carry her own load, if that makes sense. Like she's allowed to do the work, and that was for like this. I would have been reading this in sort of like 94 or something. Never seen anything like it. It was a staggering thing to me. That was sort of the thing that made me go through all the thrift stores and try to find the British comics to get more of it. And the thing is, there's really, I don't think Nina has an equal anywhere, at least from in that time. So I just, it's an extraordinary character, and to be able, I would have never in my life thought it would be an opportunity to work on her, yet here we are. And that's all Garth, I think.
Well, that's just one example of these characters that have been in limbo all this time. We're able to go back, access them, and show what British comics writers and artists were doing back in the 70s, pre-2000 AD, even. In both battle and action. I think it's a fantastic opportunity.
I think we should, sorry to interrupt, we should, on that note, you should talk about John Wagner a bit, doing Nightshade again, which is a pretty extraordinary thing after sort of coming back to it after whatever it is, all this time.
40 years, yeah.
40 years, and you know, he's come back twice now to do more HMS Nightshade, and I think Garth has said in the past that he believes HMS Nightshade might just be John Wagner's best work, which is, like, considering the depth of a man's work, is pretty extraordinary. So just the fact that John's doing new HMS Nightshade in this series as well is this fantastic sort of tether to the originals. You know, the same guy still kind of, you know, still going strong and still telling sort of really powerful stories from the period.
Yes, I agree with you completely. It comparable with Mike Dorey drawing my Hellman scripts, because he, of course, was the original Hellman artist. The fact that we've got Mike and John working on their original characters is, I think, a wonderful bonus here. But it's all sitting there. It's all waiting there over the 30 or 40 years for the taking, really. And it's great to finally be able to take advantage of that and showcase all these great characters. One thing I should say, by the way, is that this time around, we are trying to get as many action characters in there as battle. So I think it's 5 of each. I think this time around you'll have Hellman, Dredger, Death Game, Kids Rule OK, and Hookjaw from action, with the others battle. Oddly enough, even though it is set in the American Civil War, El Mestizo is actually a battle strip. If nothing else, what we're able to highlight is what kicked everything off. Brian earlier talked about the work that inspired myself and people like Alan Moore, the things that we saw in British comics. I think what it illustrates is that once you get on the road to 2000 AD, you get to a place where in British comics, the mainstream and the underground kind of collide. That, it seems to me, never really happens in American comics. I think the two are kept quite separate, more by accident than design. But you never see Los Bros or Bag or Crumb or Klaus sort of smash their way into the mainstream and do that superhero book they've always wanted to do. The closest you come, it would be Miller and Chaykin. Whereas with 2000 AD, British comics finds a place where two different threads in comics are wound around each other. Alan Moore finds a place that he can comfortably produce work. The work of Mills, Wagner, Grant inspires him. He sees somewhere where he thinks, oh, I might be comfortable here. And that is why Battle Action and the two comics that make it up are such an important part of this story. No battle, no action, no 2000 AD, and no 2000 AD, ultimately, no Vertigo. Because you don't get that British invasion then. If that doesn't happen, you don't get that weird melding of the mainstream and the underground working its way into American comics and rendering American comics a place that I would argue for a long time was subsequently more interesting than British comics as a result. Because you got the likes of Brian.
Yeah. It's nice of you to say, but I found it very humbling to go back and read these Kids Rule stories where when Pia Guerra and I created Why the Last Man over at Vertigo, we're like, let's do post-apocalyptic story where if you lost half of the planet, what would it really be like? And to pull no punches. And I thought we were being so innovative and dark, and reading what they accomplished in Kids Rule, 30, 40 years earlier with just children murdering children. I thought, how did they get away with this? It's pretty extraordinary what they did, so far ahead of its time.
And I guess part of the beauty of that story is in some ways they didn't get away with it because it derailed the entire book. Yeah. Brian, when you were first, you said you first picked up on Moore. What was the first Alan Moore stuff that you read?
I guess Watchmen it started right at the top. I was 12 years old and picked that up on a cross-country trip my family was taking, and I just read it in one sitting in the back of the family van, and my head exploded. I was like, everything changed in a moment, and from there I just started really digging to find whatever I could. but you know, it was mostly just whatever American comics he had worked on. It took a long time before I had access to sort of dig up his British stuff. And then, like I said, the stuff that influenced him took much longer to find. So I came to all of this late, but it's so delightful to discover it and to see, oh yeah, you can see where Garth was forged in the fires of these dark books.
How about you, Chris? What was it? And any other favorite British comics that we've not touched upon?
I think the first thing I can remember was probably a Miracle Man, one of the Eclipse Miracle Man issues. I think the first British thing I saw was, other than that, was I had like a history of comics I got for my birthday or Christmas that had one of those amazing Brian Bolland Dread covers. I think it was the whatever the Russian city, like the Russian judge with Judge Dredd facing off, and there's like the referee in the middle. I think that's the first like Judge Dredd image I ever saw. Just one of the best drawings ever. Also, Lobo, Simon Beasley. Without 2000 AD, we get no Lobo, which is basically just Ace Trucking Company, in the DC universe. So good. That's maybe for my personal sensibility, that's maybe the most important post 2000 AD thing to happen was Lobo.
Yeah, I think that's a great choice. How about yourself, Torunn? What were the first ones?
Well, the first ones, the thing is, I did the thing that I had mentioned earlier. I would just buy everything that I can get my hand on secondhand, because you couldn't get anything in Norway, right? So we got Belgium comics, French comics, and it wasn't until I could start reading English with any sort of confidence that I sort of really got into the anthology comics. But I didn't understand them though. Like, it was just like, oh, there's a bit of a story here. And then I would find a snippet of the rest of the story 4 years later. But the art was just on another level than anything I've ever seen. The covers of 2000 AD has always been sort of mind-blowing to me. And I don't know, like it was, but when I was thinking about when Brian said, I read Lost American just a few years ago for the first time. And it might be an American publisher, but certainly English creators. Jesus fucking Christ, that's you read that and you sort of go, what's the point? What am I going to do? Like, it's right there, right? We can go home now. But luckily we can just keep writing. It's good.
Well said, mate. And actually, the other strip that I wanted to mention before we go is that you've our mutual pal John Higgins is back working with you on one of our old favorites, Dredger, right, Garth?
Yeah, that's right. He should be finishing it up about now. It's a story from Dredger's childhood. So you can imagine it'll be a quiet stroll in the countryside. Really, nothing awful will happen. There'll certainly be no dismemberment, for instance.
And I'm going to use dismemberment as a segue into asking my final question, which is a non-comics question. Normally when Garth's on, we end up talking about war movies, and a lot of that footage gets cut out of the interview because it goes on for too long. So given the fact that the form is war here, favorite war films you're fond of? Can everybody give me one before we close out? Start with you, Brian.
I'll play my flag in Full Metal Jacket, as I think that's as good as it gets. And I'm a big proponent of the second half. I know everyone loves the first half. I think it's vastly underrated. The second half of Full Metal Jacket, that's as good as it gets. Sorry to pick American flick, but
great choice. And I think as good as it is in the first half, that's really Matthew Modine's half. That second half is great.
And it was filmed in the Isle of Dogs, right? So even though it's Vietnam, it's actually in the Isle of Dogs, weirdly.
Him saying Full Metal Jacket makes me think of Starship Troopers. Does that count?
Yeah, right on. I think that's a great choice. That feels very battle action to me.
Yeah, for sure.
What about you, Torunn?
I'm going to go Kelly's Heroes, because I painted Oddball after Donald's death. And I kept just rewatching it, and it just holds up. It's just so good.
Such a hypnotic performance by him as well, but across the board, it's great stuff. Do you know that was one of the first war movies that I actually saw a sequence where they actually showed them reloading and checking out, actually loads of war movies prior to that point. I don't remember ever seeing those scenes, but they're checking their ammunition and whatnot. They have a great conversation while they've just got some downtime. Keith, what about you?
Steve Apocalypse Now. Easy, just because it's mental. It just looks amazing. Yeah, I remember watching it and just being really kind of shocked by how chaotic the whole thing was. Just kind of summed up what was going on there, and it was just visually just amazing. And yeah, I loved it.
Rob, how about you, mate?
I'm gonna go Where Eagles Dare, I'm afraid. I mean, not only basically it's like Eagles Dare and Jaws. If I'm channel hopping, you can't go to bed. You have to actually, even though you've watched it about 400 times. And I always like I think it was a line in the Guardian review, which I was quite jealous about, where at the end of a film, apparently Richard Burton acts Patrick Wymark out of the plane, which I think is a good line. Yeah.
So true. And actually, Kelly's Hero is a Clint Eastwood film where you see him reloading, Where Eagles Dare, a Clint Eastwood film where he never reloads and he has a gun that fires 10,000 bullets. Excellent choices. Garth, what are you going to close us out on, mate?
Well, excellent choices all around, as you say. I'm going to go with A Bridge Too Far. I think because it was the last of the cast of thousands movies that they used to do so well, where every movie star does 5 minutes and they cut a movie together out of it. But I think I like it the most because it works just as well as an anti-war film as it does as a war film, because you have all the action and you have the grandeur, but you also have the horror of it and the misery and ultimately the defeat. It ends with a little family pushing their wagon load of belongings away from their ruined house through a field of graves. So it's an interesting way to end a film like that, because they usually end things like The Longest Day, The Battle of Britain, and so on. They usually end on a much lighter or higher note. That one didn't, and it's always impressed me in that regard ever since I saw it as a kid. So that would be fine.
Yeah. Well said, mate. Well said, mate. And thanks to all of you for joining me to take me through this volume 3 of Battle Action, coming at everybody right now in 10 parts and available from the links attached to our conversation from forbiddenplanet.com. Once this series winds up, is there more Battle Action in our future, Gar?
I very much hope so. Brian's already signed on for Panzer G, man. He can't wait to get started.
Yeah, I've got some models here you can have.
Okay, now I'm in.
I know everyone else is keen to go on. Yeah, we in all seriousness, yes, we want to do more. Oliver and I are talking at the moment. What form it will take, we will have to see. But we've come this far, it would be crazy not to go on.
Yeah, I love it, mate. Thank you very much for joining, for all of you for joining me. I have to tell you that my team at work today were extremely envious that I'm having this conversation. And I know most of you guys I know anyway, but in this context, talking about this book, one of their favorite books at the moment, thank you very much for joining me. And I look forward to talking with you all about more Battle Action in the future. And our American friends, thank you very much for beaming in, even though you're on the other side of the Atlantic. It's very much appreciated.
Pleasure.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Cheers.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
All right.
Cheers, Andrew.
Yeah.
If you're enjoying watching Forbidden Planet TV and you're enjoying watching us talk to the world's most interesting and accomplished filmmakers, authors, artists, musicians, creators, subscribe right here. See you soon.